35 yards out, and Peter Bonetti, the cat as they called him, he was a hell of a good keeper, and he was about 2 yards of his line. George had a quick look, curled it right into the net. Another goal that he scored was against Tommy Lawrence, an unusual one too. Now, Tommy Lawrence was a big man, and when you take Tommy jumping to catch a ball, say he's 2 foot of the ground, the length of his body plus his arms, you're talking about 10, 11 feet in the air, and he was just about to clutch the ball, and George went up with him, nodded it out of his hands. Didn't just nod it out of his hands, he nodded it down and into the net. Tommy fell on his backside and he just sat and looked at George and said, how the hell did you do that? And of course, the famous Gordon Banks one, I mean, that was a goal.
Tell us just the story of that. Tell us who they were playing, where it was at, all of that.
Well, they were playing against England. And
it was at Windsor Park?
Windsor Park. And Banks got the ball, he was about to field it, and George went up close to him. Banks threw the ball up, or pretended to throw it that way, but went the other way, and George read it, and he just hooked it out of the air. It bounced. George had it around, headed him in the net. Banks claimed he had been fouled, but I mean, in the Express on Monday, it showed you shots of it, and the heading across the top was who fouled who, because Banks tried to grab him round the waist to pull him back. But I mean, I spoke to George that evening after the match about it, and he said, Dad, I knew what he was going to do before he did it, and he did the same with Harry Gregg the next week. not exactly the same, but Pat had gathered the ball, George walked right up against him for it, and eye to eye sort of thing. And then he turned to walk away, and Pat went to field the ball, and George lifted his hip up or his thigh up and hit him there, rolled it down his leg, turned around and put it in the net. And it was, and of course that goal he scored against Benfica, the one where he went up between the two defenders and headed it down. And of course the one in the 68 final, that's the one he said he felt like lying down and heading into the net.
This is after he'd rounded the keeper?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, there was some remarkable goals. And of course, the 6 against Northampton, I mean, okay, it wasn't the top opposition, but they were still all professionals. And the goalkeeper in that game, he said, Christ, here he's coming again. No, and of course, the one we spoke about yesterday, about that goal in America, that was an incredible goal, because he beat so many players in such a short space. And
tell us who he was playing for and who they were playing against.
He's playing for the Aztecs against the New York Cosmos. And I mean, that New York Cosmos side had about 7 internationals in their team. The Beckenbauer and Pele and Cubillas and all famous players, all in their own rights.
When did he make his debut for Northern Ireland? What was it? Can you remember what his first?
It was against Wales, either Swansea or Cardiff. And the thing about it was that I had bought the paper the next morning. It was the old Wig, as they called it then. And they virtually said that they didn't see why they were raving about this youngster, this young lad Best. But then our next match was against Uruguay at Windsor Park, and George turned out and he played a blinder, and that was him sort of established then.
There are 2 other games I want to talk to you about. The first one was what some people say was his greatest match ever, but he never scored in it. It was the Scotland game at Windsor Park.
He didn't score because Ronnie Simpson played out of his skin, Scottish goalkeeper. George would have scored 6, 7 or 8 in that match, only for Simpson. Simpson was terrific. What do you call it? Tommy Gamble was on in that match, and he asked the right back that he wanted to change places, and the right back said, "I'm bloody sure I don't."
He lost it. I remember him playing without his boot at one stage in that.
Yeah, he took a corner kick. His boot come off. He left it and went on.
The other match was the second leg against Benfica in Portugal. When I think, this is just for the benefit of the tape, but hadn't Matt Busby said now played very cagey? so just tell that story from the beginning.
Matt told him to go out and sort of defend.
Could you say what match it was exactly? Was it a second leg of the quarter-final or semi-final?
It was the second leg of the semi-final. The what do you call it? No, Matt had told him to go out and sort of play a bit defensively for the first 20 minutes, get yourself settled down. But one of the papers reported that George must have heard him because he scored 2 in the first 7 minutes. And funny thing about it, I was on nights at the time, and I had taken my radio in, and I ran to our inspection, listened to him, and switched it on, and I couldn't believe my ears when I heard United are 9-2 up. This boy Best has turned on a wonderful display. He scored 2 terrific goals. But then when I seen the 2 goals up, when we went up between the 2 defenders and headed it down, he's done that twice against Benfica, actually. No, but the other match I do remember was when they played in Madrid against Real Madrid, in one of the European Cup matches, obviously, and a draw was no good to them, and George got the ball in the 10 seconds, and he went along the wing, and I got this impression, this is it. But he held the ball, held it, and he pulled it back. And who was there for a stroke it into the net? Bill Folks. The last man you would expect to be there because he had no great speed or anything else. But he was there for a stroke it into the net. And they came out on aggregate. They won the match and they went on to the final. But, I mean, it was just... When George got the ball, it was as if this is it. We have to do this now.
I want to go back and talk about the end of his Manchester United career.
Yeah.
How it appeared to you. That's what I mean. I'm trying to get your views on how it all sort of not went wrong. I don't mean it like that, but you know what I mean. How did it feel from where you were in Belfast? I mean, their concerns and everything. Well,
from what I can gather about from what George told me, something that I saw myself. They won the '68 Cup final, but after they won it, the team started to go on the decline because the players were all getting older, with the exception of a couple of them. Norby was getting on a bit, Paddy was getting on a bit, Folks was getting on a bit, Tony Dunn and them were all getting on it. And George, then they went into the second division, into the second division as they called it then. And George didn't think that is where they should have been. And then Mike England come on the market, and Busby and he bid for him, and Tottenham bid for him, and Matt went higher, and they went higher. And then it went to something like 92,000 or something, and Matt said he wouldn't go into an auction, and he dropped out. And Tottenham went to 98,000, and they bought him. And George thought that United should have bought him. That was his, and then build a team round like that. It didn't happen. And the funny thing about it, I met Mike England. I'd met him a few times actually, but I met him at the PFA Awards there. Well, it was over with me and all. And met him at the PFA Awards, and he said to me, give me a bit of a hug. He said, he says, Mr. Best, the greatest compliment I was ever paid in my life was your boy wanting me to play in United with him. So, and that's another thing too that makes me very proud about George. It was the respect he got from other players, because Jim Baxter told me in his pub in Glasgow that George was the greatest player he'd ever seen or ever played against. Tommy Smith told me the same thing in Los Angeles, and he said, we used to be sent out to scare George, and we only wasted our so-and-so time. And Peter Osgood told me in the Europa Hotel, if anybody ever said a word against your boy, he said I would give him these, and he put the two big ham fists up. And Emlyn Hughes on the This Is Your Life programme, George was brought in that night as one of the guests, and when George went to sit down, he put his arm on his shoulder, and he said, can I say something before George sits down? So, yeah. He said, this is the greatest player I've ever seen or ever played against. So, I mean, when you get that, and even the people who kicked him, well, they respected him. They respected him so much that they went any lengths for to kick him. That seems an analogy in terms of, but that's the way it looked to me, you know.
So, really, in a way, George, because Matt really failed to start rebuilding the team, George became a bit disillusioned.
He did, yeah. He didn't think that they should have a team like Manchester United should be in the second division. Of course, you knew the story about who put them there. Dennis Law, that Pack Heel. He says he never scored a goal with such regret in all his life. He said he felt like crying.
He walked off.
He did. He did.
He just said substitute me, didn't he?
But you see, Dennis is a great bloke. Vallett's met him, Barbara's met him, we've all met him. Mm-hmm. He's a character. And he idolised George as well, as a friend, not just as a player, but as a friend.
Let's talk about George leaving Manchester United, because obviously, you know, it's just, he'd been with the club since he was 15, so it was a big decision, wasn't it?
After they won the European Cup in '68, the team, they were all getting on a bit in years, and they started deteriorating a bit, and George wasn't happy with the situation, and then when they went into the second division, as it was known at that time, he was very unhappy about that, and he thought that the club weren't doing enough for them, get them back on their feet, and he wanted them to sign, well, Mike England was on the market, and Tottenham were bidding for him, United were bidding for him, and Matt Busby went to 92,000, and Tottenham went to 98, I think it was. And then Busby said he wouldn't go into an auction, and he bought Ian Muir instead. Now, Ian wasn't a bad player, but he wasn't a Mike England. And George thought that was probably, they'd done a wrong thing. They should have started building around the like of him and Mike England and a couple of other players who still had a bit left in them. But then, of course, he did the runner. He used to play against Chelsea, and only Chelsea came into George's life quite a lot. But he was to play against Chelsea, and he did a runner, and he rang me to tell me he was coming home, and I asked if I would meet him at the airport. He had bought a car, and he gave it to me, and I went up to the airport, and spoke to the airport police and asked if I could park the car outside the building, which at that time you weren't allowed to do, and I gave them the keys, showed them my identification, and I went in and met him, and the reporters were coming out of the woodwork sort of thing, and they got the word that he was on his way, and they asked me, of course, what are you doing here, Mr. Best? And I said, you know what I'm doing here. And George came out and he spoke to them. Well, they spoke to him, we got around him, and then I asked him not to follow us, leave us, wanted to get home and chat. But of course, they did follow us, but nobody got into the house. I just kept them all out. But then he eventually went back, as I remember. But then he just decided that he wasn't going back at all, and he went to America. But then he came back from America, and Tommy Doherty had taken over at that time, and he got George Coates to sign again, which he did, and he told him he didn't care what he did in his private life as long as he turned up for training and whatever. And George didn't turn in on a Thursday. They were to play Plymouth in one of the rounds of the cup. Plymouth were a third division side or something at the time. And when George arrived on Saturday, he wasn't on the team sheet, and he asked why, and Doherty said he didn't train on Thursday. He said, I did, but I didn't come in the morning, come in the afternoon. He said, well, you're not playing anyhow. And then George said, well, if I'm not fit to play against Plymouth, he said, I won't be back. And he walked out and he never went back.
How would you like him to be remembered?
Well, I mean, obviously, as footballers go, I think no matter where the subject crops up, George will be remembered as one of the greats. And that's not me just saying that. That has been shown, proved in many ways. But I'd like him to be remembered as a down-to-earth bloke who didn't make a big deal of who he was and what he was. And another thing that I'm proud of about George is that he had nothing against people because of their class, colour or creed. He had no interest in politics or people's religions or beliefs. And that is one of the things that I'm very proud of him for as well.
And you miss him?
Oh, yes, yes. I'd like to see him walking through that door. We didn't see as much of him as a family as we would have liked to. In the last few years, whatever, Barbara probably seen more of him than what we did, because it was her having the house in France. He went across there and for a bit of a break and all. But it would be nice to have seen him more often, but that's the way it goes. You know the story about how when he went away at the start and he came back again, and then he went back again. But he was homesick for about a year, but then it got to the degree that you couldn't get him to come home. But then again, he was tied up in his work and his job as a footballer. He had his training to do. He had to play international matches. He had to play overseas matches for United, you know. So he had limited opportunities of getting home, really.
But what a life he had, Dick.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, I suppose many people, outside of his problem with the drink, I suppose many people would have given their lives for to live the way he did, you know, and whatever. But I'll always be proud of him, because I understand his drink problem better than maybe most people would do, but because I used to go to open meetings in Shaftesbury Square Hospital, which deals with all addictions, and Dr. Muirhead, the chief authority there, he would have told you that you don't know when you take your first ever drink where it's going to lead. And the second thing impressed on you was that alcohol is a drug. And there's nobody sets out to be an alcoholic.
That last week must have been very tough on you, Dickie.
Yeah, but the one consolation was that George heavily sedated, of course, but he sort of slept away in a way peacefully, and we all spoke in his ear before they just decided that it was over for him, and it was hard to credit how much the two doctors took it to heart. because it formed a friendship of a sort, some bond with George. You know. When we were at his bedside that last day and night, I was actually saying, trying to transmit my thoughts to him, George, let go. You know, because he wasn't in agony according to what they said. He wasn't having any pain or anything. But we all spoke in his ear and whatever, including Dr. Elisa. He did the same thing as we did. So it was very, very genuine, the whole thing.
I always remember the pictures of you after he'd died, and you had to go out and face the press. And you stood there very dignified and very quiet, and all you just said was at the end, "Please leave us alone." What exactly prompted you? Why did you decide to do that?
Well, Barbara already had spoken. She already had told him, like, well, George is gone now, sort of thing, and whatever. And then I just asked him, would they just go away and leave us to grieve in peace? I said that's just a human request. And some of them went and some of them didn't. Now, I don't know whether they were all press or there could have been television companies that got, but at the end of the day, they were all. One of them even ventured to try to speak to me, and Barbara, she just cut him short. Just.
Can I move you forward then to the week leading up to the funeral? How did you stay sane through that? Because it really was a very pressured week, wasn't it?
I don't really know. I suppose it's like everything else in life. You've got to face up to it and accept it. I suppose the one consolation was that George didn't die alone, and he didn't die an agonising death. At least as far as we've been told by the hospital, he was in no pain. But I suppose we just had to accept it. It was over. And
I mean, everybody was very, very impressed by the dignity you showed on the day itself.
Well, I mean, I didn't see it as anything, only just a natural reaction, you know, because we have never, ever as a family, in any way, went over the top about George. I mean, we never boasted about him. We didn't think that we were special. Because to me, George he was born with a gift. And even when he became a name, that was one of the things I said to him.